For instance, I know that I found a reason why I'm doing something.
Mm.
How do I also know that it's a story that I'm telling myself, or that it's something that is actually true?
You don't know until you learn how to quiet your ego. You don't know if the why that you're telling yourself is actually truthful until you learn how to quiet your ego. Because until then, your ego is trying to protect you. And really, in a lot of instances, what that really means is your ego is trying to protect you from you. Until you learn how to look in a mirror and see the actual you and not the persona that you've created, you don't know if your why is true. Because oftentimes we look in the mirror and we think we're seeing ourselves, but we're really seeing the mask that we wear. We've been wearing it for so long that we now believe that's who we are. So we accept that as self when it really isn't. And the person that you really are is either afraid of the person you're portraying yourself as, or vice versa. Because it's the person that you portray yourself as that has all the accolades. That's why you keep portraying yourself as that person. Whereas the person that you really are, you don't think has any accolades. And so that person may not be valid. But it's the person that you really are that created the persona. So really all the greatness comes from the person you really are. But that greatness, that power, is oftentimes scary to people. One, because it's unknown, and two, because they feel undeserving of it. Why should a person who's afraid to even be who they really are deserve power? How powerful could you really be if you don't even want to be you? And then when you feel the power, you're so unpracticed, you're so not practiced at standing in that space that you don't know what to do with that energy. You don't know what to do in that space. So you run from it. How do you run from it? You lean back into the persona. So you run from yourself by creating a persona, which reinforces the persona to believe it's the solution, which reinforces your ego to continuously defend a limiting belief. You get rid of or at least you control the ego, then the true you comes out. You can have a conversation with the real you, which will give you your real why.
Some people say you gotta kill the ego. Why not?
Some people say you have to kill the ego. I'm not sure what that even means. And I doubt that it's possible. And I doubt that you want to do that, if it is possible. In a lot of ways, your ego is actually your friend. It's always helping you, even when it's hurting you. It's helping you feel better about the situation, even though you should probably confront it. It's helping you tell yourself a story that's not absolute truth, but it's also not an absolute lie. That's why it's easier to believe it. I'm not sure if you want to kill your ego. It can be useful. Perhaps you don't want it in the driver's seat of your life, but you don't want it to be dead. And again, I really don't know what that means. What does that look like?
Not giving your ego any way in on anything.
But are you killing it? Because it's still there. You're just abandoning it.
So it'd be how to quiet the ego.
Quieting the ego is very important. But killing the ego, probably not so much. Quieting the ego is important because your ego controls fear, which makes it dangerous. Because fear, if you're not careful, can pose as intuition. And they're very different. Intuition is not fear-based. Intuition is it's rooted in spiritual wisdom, whereas fear is rooted in an illusion, a story that you tell yourself via your ego to somehow protect yourself from yourself. Intuition is not protecting you from you. Intuition is revealing you to you. So you definitely want to learn how to quiet the ego. But again, killing it. I don't know how possible that is. But it is possible to quiet the ego.
You often hear people say like, oh, he got his ego checked. As if it's a bad thing. But in the context of all of this, I'm starting to think like,
It's a great thing. It is a great thing. But in the world that values ego, we can oftentimes see it as a loss. But that's also the ego defending itself.
How so?
The other person has an ego, the person that's saying that. And that ego is important to that person on the subconscious level. So if that person is saying you got your ego checked, they're essentially saying the persona that you created is not strong enough to handle the situation. So in essence, you need to strengthen your ego. You need to improve your ego. Because a lot of people believe self-esteem comes from ego. So when they're saying you got your ego checked, they're attaching that to your self-worth. Because again, your ego is telling you the story to protect you. It only wants to protect you because it believes you to be worthy. Worthy of protection. Worthy of celebration. So if someone is saying your ego got checked as a derogatory statement, essentially they're saying you're not who you think you are. So subconsciously, that person's ego is protecting that person by exposing that it happened to you. In other words, saying it didn't happen to them. Because if you see something happen to someone else, you can either overemphasize the fact that it happened to them, meaning focus on what happened to them, or you can ask yourself, could that happen to me too? You in the same environment as this person. You're no different from that person on a human level. So if it can happen to that person, then chances are it can happen to you too. But you need to reinforce yourself that it's not happening to you. And so you need to focus on the fact that it's happening to him, what's happening to her, to repel the idea of it potentially happening to you. So that's that person's ego protecting them. But it's also your ego protecting you. Because like attracts like. You're probably around that person. Because you probably would have done that same thing in your own way. If that person's ego got checked, you probably would have focused on that person's ego getting checked instead of thinking about how that could have potentially happened to you. If you quiet your ego, you start meeting people who can quiet theirs, and you can connect with that person in a way that's rooted in truth, not fear. The ego is reinforcing itself at all costs, even if it has to minimize you to do so. It's like your parent beating you to teach you a lesson. It hurts in the moment, but it's done with the intention to make you better. Whether that actually works or not, it's up for debate.
It's hard to see sometimes what you're naturally good at if you don't really do a lot of things, try a lot of things, or when you're consistent with a lot of things. So that whenever you do something, it's like, or when you decide like, this is what I'm gonna do, there's no evidence for that. So let's say it's like, all right, I want to do this for these and these reasons. So I feel like this is in alignment with who I am. But then you can come to the conclusion that like, but I haven't done anything that shows that I'm this, and this. Then you can say that about anything that you do because you haven't never done anything for a long period of time. So how do you ever come to any conclusions?
By doing things. Part of your childhood that's part of the importance of exploring as a child. Really having hobbies, really having things that you try. Because all of that allows you to get to know yourself over the years. And then it also develops a habit of you putting yourself out there, doing things, learning about yourself. So as you age, you do gain a better understanding of what you're good at, what you enjoy. And thus it gives you a gauge as to what direction you could potentially take your life into. If you don't have that experience as a child, that's okay, because you don't get to choose within the human realm. You don't really get to choose your childhood so much. At least not your first childhood. But your second childhood is up to you. meaning you can remain childlike. You can remain adventurous. You can decide to be an explorer later in life. So you can start late and still figure it out. But you have to put yourself out there. It's probably not going to happen when you're sitting in the house. You can't run from the world, because ultimately running from the world is running from yourself. Because you learn about who you are in relation to other people. So if you're not putting yourself around other people, chances are your understanding of self is limited or partial. Put yourself out there. And if you're coming from an abundance mindset, and chances are you may not feel like you're missing out on something because you started later. Because sometimes that's why people don't start later. They feel like they're too old. They feel like there's other things that they should be doing, even though they're not prepared for those things because they didn't do any of the prerequisites. They didn't take any of the steps that they could have taken before to help lead them to doing that thing. So they either try to dive right in, and that's a very uncomfortable experience, or they run from it, which is also a very uncomfortable experience, but probably a little more comfortable than diving right into it, at least in the short term. Go for it. Put yourself out there. And you can baby step your way there to some extent, because baby steps there's a phase for baby steps. Well, there are phases for baby steps, but there are also times when you have to take that leap of faith. And that happens multiple times in life. It's not just once. Sometimes you have a soft landing, sometimes you don't. Sometimes the drop is not so far, sometimes it is. But you gotta get in the game, because if you never jump, you'll never know. And ultimately, that's one of the biggest fears that humans have. Fear of the unknown. So put yourself in position to find out.